I'm so happy to be joined today by Rich Roberts, the 1993 Nobel Laureate in Physiology or Medicine. Rich, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And since this interview, it's mostly aimed at inspiring young scientists, early career researchers, I want to start with the first and most obvious question, I guess. And based on your, extensive research experience, what would be the most important advice you would give to young people for having a successful scientific career?
Well, I think the first thing I always tell everybody is that you really need to find out what you're passionate about and then pursue that passion. Because if you do that, you will be very happy to go to work every Monday morning, and you'll be very disappointed when you have to leave on a Friday afternoon while you figure out what to do over the weekend until Monday comes round again. So it's really good. I love what I do. I've always loved what I do. I don't really think I've worked a day in my life, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing advice here. When you said you'll be unhappy when Friday 5 p.m. comes, that's amazing advice. And speaking of young people, most of them are, in the phase of developing their skill set, their research skill set, their research mindset, maybe. So what do you think would be, I don't want to call it the perfect research kind of skill set or mindset, but what do you think are the most important things that a young scientist should start developing or should have developed by the time they actually go into research?
Well, I think, it's really important when you're at school to figure out what are the subjects that you really enjoy. So for me, I started off loving mathematics. I thought I was going to have a profession in mathematics, but then my father bought me a chemistry set. And then I discovered that chemistry was pretty important too. And I loved chemistry. I also read a book entitled How You Become a Detective. And at one time I thought I might become a regular detective, sort of, a professional one, solving mysteries and what have you. But then I did chemistry. I went to university for chemistry, did my bachelor's in chemistry, did my Ph.D. in chemistry. And during my Ph.D., I started to read much more widely, not just in chemistry, but about other things. And I came across molecular biology, and I read a book by John Kendrew, which really was called The Thread of Life, but it describes the early days of molecular biology and how it all got started. And by the time I finished that book, I knew that was what I wanted to do with my life. And so I then went to Harvard as a postdoc, pursued DNA, RNA sequencing, and then went to Cold Spring Harbor and continued doing, in this case, DNA sequencing. And during the course of that, made a discovery for which I later won the Nobel Prize. But I think the important things were just to find things that you love to do, whether it's just learning at high school or whether it's learning on the job. But always make sure you read around your subject. Read things that are not in your field immediately. Go to lectures that are not immediately in your field. For instance, when I was finishing my postdoc, I went to a lecture by Dan Nathans, who was talking about the newly discovered restriction enzymes. And when I went to Cold Spring Harbor, that's what I did. I started looking for new restriction enzymes. And in a relatively short period of time, we found 30 or 40 new ones. And that led ultimately to starting New England Biolabs, among other things. So I think it's really important that you listen to things, read about things outside of your subject. And if you find something that's more interesting than what you're doing at the moment, then do it. Don't be afraid to change.
Yeah, definitely. So you're saying be curious, be a detective. I feel like in research and science, we're all kind of detectives, looking for the answer.
Exactly. And what I do now is bioinformatics, and a lot of that is mathematics. And so, everything I've ever loved to do in my life have now all come together in what I do professionally. So I'm the luckiest person very, very lucky.
Amazing. Yeah. And in research and in really many fields, there are, of course, barriers, unfortunately, or maybe some people will argue, fortunately, because when you overcome them, you become stronger, wiser, all of that. But what do you think are the main barriers for scientific progress, maybe especially for younger kind of researchers?
Well, I think a lot of time people worry unnecessarily about these barriers. For me, I always think a barrier is something to overcome. And if possible, ignore and just get on and do what you really want to do. Whenever people tell me, oh, you shouldn't do this, you can't do this, I always think, well, that's going to be pretty interesting. If they are not interested in it, and I am, then that's probably going to be a good thing to do. I think another thing is the grant process, trying to get a grant in order to do your work. And unfortunately, the granting agencies, in my view, do not do a very good job of selecting candidates and picking people that they should be supporting. They often pick people who are rather conservative in their research goals in order to fund them. And they don't take chances with people who can be imaginative. But of course, you know, I now work for a company, New England Biolabs. I'm their chief scientific officer. And all of my research is paid for by the company. And I don't have to apply for grants. I don't have to do anything other than research. And so for me, this has become a good way to do it. And I think many people can start companies and support their own research this way. You don't have to have a lot of money to start a company. You just need a good idea. And then if the company is successful, it will grow and your opportunities will grow. So I think there are many, many ways in which one can support research, follow your passion for research. But for most people, it's an academic path, and you tend to go looking for grants, and that can be a bit of a problem. My approach to grants was always apply for a grant and then do what you think is really interesting, whether or not it was the stuff you originally said you were going to do in your grant application.
Yeah, I can definitely feel that. I can definitely feel that. And in terms of maybe on the other hand, not really barriers, maybe even opportunities in research in science, you know, we all have to generate ideas from somewhere, either from going
Yeah.
to meetings, reading new papers and everything. And I feel like open access is definitely something that can help in that regard. So can you maybe touch upon open access, how you feel like is open access good? Is it not good? And really touch upon maybe certain countries that don't maybe have the funding for open access versus other countries that maybe do.
Okay. Well, so, you know, I shortly after I won the Nobel Prize, I got involved in organizing the Nobel Laureates in support of open access. And we made a big push. We tried to get Nature and Science and Cell as three journals. We said, if you become open access, you will set the stage for the rest of the world. But they were more interested in money than they were in the science that they were publishing and in how best to help people. And so that's taken a long time, but we are now getting to a point where open access is becoming the norm rather than keeping things behind paywalls. So I'm a huge fan of open access. And in fact, I won't publish in journals that are not open access. So I've had several papers that ended up going to, say, the Nature journals, where I refused to have my name as an author, and I made them put in the acknowledgements that normally I would have been an author, but I disagree with their open access policies. So I'm very, very big on open access, and I think it's just essential. If people are going to do science and read what other people are doing, they have to have access to the literature. And it's not just scientists, I think, for high school kids. Many high school kids are interested in science. They're interested in what is new, what is the latest thing to do. They need to have access. They shouldn't have to pay in order to read Nature or Science or whatever. So I think open access is absolutely important. I was actually chief US editor of one of the journals that moved quickly early on from a cost model to an open access model. That was nucleic acids research. And I told them at the time that if they didn't shift, I was going to resign as editor. And so they shifted. And they took the lead, and they were one of the very first journals ever to go from the traditional public publishing model to open access.
Yeah, I mean, you feel strongly about open access, and so do I. Professor Rich, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a brief but very, very nice conversation with you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's nice talking to you, and I hope to see you later in the year.